ayuden, por favor, a apagar las cámaras.
Silenciamos micrófono.
Señor, gracias, muy amable. Voy a hacer la presentación del doctor. Quiero darle las buenas tardes. Aquí son bienvenidos, siempre son bienvenidos acá. A todos los nuevos y a los que ya nos conocen, pues bienvenidos por acompañarnos. Voy a presentarles al doctor Walter J., es profesor emérito de oftalmología de la Universidad de Loyola en Chicago. Hizo su residencia de oftalmología en la Universidad de Chicago, Illinois. También hizo su fellow de neurooftalmología en la Universidad de California, San Francisco, con el doctor William Hoyt. Él es profesor asistente y asociado del Departamento de Oftalmología de Georgia y de Loyola University. Él es consultor de 2 centros, tanto en Georgia como en Arkansas, y también pertenece a varios comités o sociedades nacionales y ha sido vicepresidente y presidente tanto de la Sociedad Oftalmológica de Chicago y de la Sociedad de Illinois para la Prevención de la Ceguera. El doctor ha recibido muchos honores académicos y premios. Ya los pueden ver ahí, no los voy a leer, pero ha tenido 123 artículos publicados y 43 abstractos. Él pertenece al editorial board de Seminarios en Oftalmología y es el coeditor jefe de el Neuro-Ophthalmology. Y por supuesto, siempre detrás de un gran hombre hay una gran mujer, su esposa. Le damos la bienvenida al doctor Walter J. y le agradecemos que nos acompañe y nos enseñe y nos permita ayudarnos a estar acá y que nos enseñe cómo podemos hacer publicaciones en artículos, ya que desde los latinos a veces no hacemos eso y nos falta un poco de orientación, y le agradecemos al doctor que nos vaya a acompañar y hacerlo. Gracias, doctor, es un honor tenerlo.
Gracias.
Doctor, it's an honor to have you here with us.
It's my honor as well. Are we ready to put my slides up?
Yeah, you can share your. Can you share your?
It's share. It's share.
Uh-huh.
There they are.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Emily, is it okay for me to begin?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. So it's really, this is my first Zoom lecture that I ever gave. So do not hesitate to help me along. And I would definitely appreciate any feedback. And as the talk goes, if you have any questions. And it's good to have Emily here as well, because Emily is actually the associate editor for neuro-ophthalmology for South America. And what that means is if you submit an article to neuro-ophthalmology, it's not me in Chicago deciding whether or not your article is accepted. It's actually Emily. And Emily, basically what happens, and I'll go through this, Emily really is in charge of any article submitted from South America. So you have somebody close to you that you know who will shepherd your article through. Now, I guess one of the first questions is, why submit a manuscript to a journal? And for residents and fellows, publishing a manuscript enhances their ability to obtain either a prize fellowship or an academic position. In academic medicine, one of the keys to success to become a full professor or a tenured professor is your publication list in peer-reviewed journals. And it tends to be extremely important almost any place in the world. Now, one of the things that I really want to emphasize to you is when you're submitting an article, don't feel like Emily and I are your adversaries. We're not against you. In actual fact, we're partners in the process of getting articles accepted. And we actually want to accept your articles. And personally, I make every effort to assist residents, fellows, and junior faculty in getting their manuscripts accepted for publication. And I'm particularly interested in the journal publishing more articles from South America. So do not hesitate to submit articles to us, and we'll do everything we possibly can to accept your article. Of course, it has to be a good article, and Emily will be sure of that, but she will help you to try to make it as good of an article as possible. Now, I want to be more open with you when you choose wisely when you select the right journal. Now, I know there are ophthalmologists and neurologists, and you may have articles that are really not suitable for neuro-ophthalmology. And then you have to make a choice what journal you'd like to submit it to. For our journal, neuro-ophthalmology obviously has to have some association with the topic of neuro-ophthalmology. For example, we're not going to accept an article on endophthalmitis or retinal detachment or things of that sort. So if it's not really neuro-ophthalmology, you have to pick the topic that really fits the article you're writing. Now, when you make your final selection, scan issues of that journal, and you can scan our journal to see, does it seem like the topic you're planning to submit would fit in. And this I cannot emphasize more. And I'll probably bring this point up with you a number of times. When you're writing the articles, look at the instructions for authors and make sure your manuscript follows what the instructions for authors say. It makes things go so much more smoothly if your publication manuscript is in the style of the journal. And if you have a topic that you wonder whether we in our neuro-ophthalmology journal would be interested in it, feel free to contact either myself or Emily. And you can we put up our emails, and we can tell you whether we might be interested in the topic for the journal. We don't bite. You've heard that may be more about American, but we're really there to try to help you, to be honest with you. And when you submit an article, and if it's not to neuro-ophthalmology, be realistic. Not all studies are landmark studies. Journal editors may not share your enthusiasm, so pick your journal wisely. In the United States, probably the most prestigious journal is the New England Journal of Medicine, but they only accept maybe 2 or 3% of the articles that are submitted. So, unless you want to waste a lot of time, it's best to try to submit your article to a journal that you have a fairly good chance of getting it accepted to. And it just makes everything better for you as well. Now, again, I'm going to begin with some general tips, and then I'm going to discuss the specifics of getting an article together. The first thing is, in any article, try not to get a promotional tone. Basically, give them the facts and go in that direction. And as I said, always follow the instructions to the author. Read them over carefully and make sure your article follows that. Now, look at the journal and look at the instructions that, for authors, and make sure your article you're submitting follows that format. It shows that you're interested in getting the article accepted to our specific journal. If you submit it in the style of, say, the Archives of Ophthalmology, we'll know that it probably was rejected someplace else. As I said, again, this is what I said. If it's different, we know that you may have probably submitted someplace else. If you did submit it someplace else and now you're submitting it to us, revise it to the correct style before you submit it. Does anyone have any questions so far?
No, now, sorry. For
Okay.
the last, the question we tried to do in the last, when will you finish?
Okay. Now, one of the things for the people who have not written many articles, I would suggest don't try to make the first draft perfect. In fact, I never do when I do this. What I try to do is, and I call it a junk draft. And I just try to put my ideas on the computer. And I realize that a lot of the ideas I'll throw out, but it gets, once you start putting something on the computer and getting an outline and working from that, then other ideas will come to you. And that's why I strongly don't try to make the first draft perfect. Just do something with it and put it on paper. And then sometimes the best thing you can do is, once you've done that rough draft, put it away for a day or two, and your mind will be thinking about it. And by the time you look at it again, you'll have more ideas. So then you get to the point where you want to come up with a good title. And what you want to do is make it concise and comprehensive and objective. Don't make it too long. It should not summarize the findings. Now, I'm going to get into a topic that sometimes gets into an issue, is if you're writing up a paper and you're writing up, say, a case report, often there's a question of who should be an author on that. And there actually are criteria set up by the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. And people's names should not be put on an article unless they really worked on the article. And they should have a substantial contribution to it. And they could be the ones that drafted it. They could be the ones that revised it. They supply important content, and they put it together in a good shape for the final draft. I can just tell you, at a lot of medical schools and things, authorship often becomes an issue. And the author should meet these criteria. You should not you should not just put people's name on an article simply because they're your friend. And for our journal, we generally do not, for a case report, we generally do not want more than 4 authors on a case report. That seems about right, unless it's an extremely complicated case report, say with a lot of genetics, a lot of pathology. You know, it's the 4 authors is not hard and fast, but it's probably pretty reasonable for one to do it that way. Does anyone have any questions about authorship? If you write a lot, this becomes a problem. Now, the abstract is the first thing that I look at as an editor, and often it's the only thing that a lot of readers will read. So it's really important to try to do a good job in the abstract. I actually tend to write the abstract last, after I've got the paper together. And every so often you'll see this, but people will include information in the abstract that's not in the manuscript. Either they wrote the abstract first, and then they didn't include everything that they have in the abstract, or they added things that weren't in the paper. So make sure the abstract only contains information that's in the body of the manuscript. Now, the introduction, it provides background information. And it pretty much, what you're trying to do is explain your rationale for conducting this study or review, or why you, for example, if you're doing a case report, why you decided that this case report is of value to be published. For example, you could say is that you reviewed the literature and you could not find anything similar, and in your case is unique. And finally, the last paragraph or the last few sentences of the introduction should explain why you're writing the paper. Now, when you're writing a manuscript, it depends on what you're writing. Neuro-ophthalmology accepts case reports. We accept case series. We accept reviews, and obviously we accept clinical research projects. And so the materials and methods will be different depending upon what type of paper it is. But let's just say it's a scientific study or a clinical trial of a number of patients. You need to, the materials and methods is where you explain that. And for reviews or secondary analysis and commentaries, provide details of the databases that you searched and keywords. And by the way, for neuro-ophthalmology, we require you to supply some keywords when you submit the manuscripts. And then again, this will depend, the results will depend on what type of manuscript you're writing. And obviously it'll be different with a case report. But if you're doing a case series or you're doing a scientific study, then you will be having results. And by the way, for any figures, text, graphs, these should all stand alone. You should be you can discuss them in the paper in the results section, but any of your graphs, any of your figures should be able to stand alone. And you know, with the figures, there's always comments on the figures. People should be able to look at the figures by themselves and understand what you're trying to say. Now, what often happens is people will start putting discussion results, and you should try to avoid doing that as much as you can. And again, that's why, as I said, I begin with what I call a junk draft, and I keep rewording it, and try to get it clean. And in the results, obviously, report things in a logical situation in a logical sequence. Now, the discussion and conclusion is where you want to give your opinions. Obviously, if it's a study presented in a balanced manner, you should say what's good about the study, what's bad about the study, and if there's any papers that contradict yours, you should obviously discuss those as well. Try not to overstate your findings. Ensure what you're trying to say is justified. Now, acknowledgments, and I sort of got into this with you a bit with the authorship. Some people on a manuscript really should not be included as authors, but that doesn't mean you can't acknowledge them in the acknowledgement section. And in the acknowledgement section, clearly indicate any study support or funding from any societies that are helping to fund your study. This is where you can acknowledge all assistance, writing, editorial, or statistical. And in this point, I guess partly what I'm saying here is you may require a statistician. You don't necessarily have to put the statistician as a author. You can just acknowledge them here. And again, you try not to get too many authors on your manuscripts. We always wonder when you see 12 or 15 people on a manuscript whether maybe some of them should not have been authors and some of them should have just been acknowledged. Now, references. I think the key thing here is sometimes people will begin working on a manuscript and they put it away, and sometimes they put it away for 3 to 6 months or even a year, and then they start, for some reason, maybe they have some time available to them, and they go back to the manuscript. But if they do that, if you do something like that, you should go back and do a Medline search to see if there are any more references that are important, and particularly in the last 6 months or a year. We don't want to, we question an article if all the references are 10 years old. You certainly want to see references in the last year or two before the article is published. And again, follow the journal style. You can look at neuro-ophthalmology and see how references are included in the styling section, and just try to mimic that. And what we don't like is avoid data on file or personal communications or that. We want to see articles or abstracts that the reviewers or the people reading the journal can grab a hold of if they want to read further on the topic. Okay, so to summarize, as I said, I'd begin by doing just a real rough draft and then keep working on it and try to get it into shape. And you want to follow the journal style. And that's critical. It's really important to spend the time to read the instructions of the authors and follow those. Now, if you have a good personal friend, you might want to ask them to look at the manuscript and read it over you know, when I'm doing this, or I think anybody is doing this, yeah, after you've read something over 4 or 5 times, you tend not to see the problems with it. And it's sometimes good to have somebody with to look at it with fresh eyes to see if there are any issues regarding the manuscript. And be open to constructive criticism. What can happen also is, it almost becomes like your baby, and you don't want to change anything because you worked on it so long. And you just have to be open to the fact that maybe there can be problems with it. And now I'm talking to a group from South America, and obviously, for most of you, English is a second language. And some of you speak it better than you write it. And if that's the case, you might want to get someone who's an English editor to look over your manuscript. Emily probably can give you some suggestions. If not, we can. Obviously, the people who do these type of reviews will request a fee for doing it, but it can be really critical. If you're not really good at writing English, it's really worth the money to have somebody edit the article for you. Are there any questions so far? Emily, are there anything in the chat?
Yeah, you have a question. Alex, do you want to do it for me?
Sure, I'll be glad to do it now.
So here we have a question about like the position or the order of the authors, like who should go first or last and why, and also if you can comment something about corresponding authors.
Okay, it's a very good question. As a general rule, the first author should be the person who does the majority of the work on the article. And by that, I would say that that the first author should do 50 to 75% of the work on the article.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you typically say if there's 4 authors, the last author tends to be the senior professor that's helping with the article. Now, does that answer the first part of the question?
Yes, I think
Yeah,
so.
I believe that's correct.
Now,
Yeah,
in regards to the corresponding author,
Mm-hmm.
in general, we would probably have the first author as the corresponding author, but it really depends somewhat on the situation. If the first author is going to be moving quickly, say he's a resident or a fellow, and it might be better for the senior author to be the corresponding author. That can be worked out. I don't think it's. I don't feel strongly on that point. But what sometimes happens if someone moves, sometimes the correspondence doesn't get to them for some reason, and that can be a problem. And sometimes it's better just to have the senior author as the corresponding author. But typically, I would say over 90% of the time, the first author is the corresponding author.
Okay, and one other question about authorship is how about like having 2 first authors? Like sometimes like there are some papers or some projects like the idea was developed between 2 people.
Right.
People work equally. What about that kind of thinking?
I understand that, but when the journal comes out, there's only going to be one person first, right?
Okay.
So I think you know, that's a difficult question to answer. If you have a good senior mentor in a situation like that, ideally the senior mentor should make the decision on who goes first, who goes second, who goes third. And it should be based upon who did the most work. But I recognize that sometimes there isn't a good senior mentor to make these decisions. And, I have to tell you, it's not uncommon for issues to flare up with this, that people feel that they should have been included and they weren't, and things of that sort. So I would say it's probably best to try to sort this out prior to submitting the article. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Let me check this. I think in Facebook we don't have any questions yet.
Okay, so we're at the stage now, we're thinking about submitting the article. And again, keep in mind language translation issues. If you're not comfortable writing in English, get someone to help you. I must say on this that if there's really an issue with the language, it could interfere with your article getting a fair read. Sometimes it's just, to move this away from South America, we just to give you another example, we get quite a few articles from Turkey, and they're very bright people there, just like they are in South America, but they often have difficulty with the English language. And sometimes it's just really difficult to understand what they're trying to get across in their article. So I really would like to emphasize to you, if you're not comfortable writing in English, it's worth getting somebody to help you that can edit your article for you. Now, this is what I always do. And this is tough because, as you know, patience is a virtue. And I don't really have that virtue. I want to move ahead. But what I've learned is it's probably best, once I'm done with the paper, to just let it sit for a day or two. And that way you can sort of read it almost for the first time, if you wait 2 or 3 days before you submit it. And you will see errors that you can't understand how they got there. And I can't emphasize more, revise and revise again. So the article is in really good shape before you submit it. And then you send it off. And nowadays, I'd say 95% of all journals, if not more, you send them electronically. And for neuro-ophthalmology, the manuscripts are all submitted online via Manuscript Central. And since you're all on Zoom, I suspect you all will not have any difficulty at all submitting an article on Manuscript Central. It's pretty straightforward. But again, if you have trouble submitting it, contact Emily or myself, and we'll try to talk you through it. Now, one of the things with neuro-ophthalmology that we pride ourselves on is usually you'll get a decision, an initial decision in 30 to 45 days. Some journals, that can take 6 months or longer. I remember over 30 years ago, I submitted an article to the British Journal of Ophthalmology, and I didn't receive anything back for over 6 months to 9 months. And nowadays, with electronic submissions, we really make a conscientious effort to get an initial decision back to you in 30 to 45 days. So initially what happens is you will submit it on Manuscript Central, and the corresponding author, but I think most of the authors will receive an email that contains a tracking number for your paper and whom to copy on correspondence. And usually that's me, and probably you should copy Emily as well. So we're going to talk about the peer review process, but before we even get to the peer review process, we take a look at the article. And as I said, the first thing we do is try to determine whether the topic is appropriate for neuro-ophthalmology. And believe it or not, we'll get articles that are purely retinal articles, and every so often we'll get an article that's like purely glaucoma, and only has a very mild connection with neuro-ophthalmology. And in that case, what we'll do is say, you have a very good article here, but we're really not the right place for you. You really should be submitting it to a retinal or a glaucoma journal. And again, we're looking at formatting of the article, and if it's totally off, we may send it back to you to have it formatted according to the style. So you can, if you do it right the first time, it's better off, you're better off. Okay, so what happens is there are 2 co-editors for neuro-ophthalmology, and we divide the articles up half and half, and it's purely random. So my co-author is from the United Kingdom, but I get a number of articles from the United Kingdom where I'm the editor-in-chief assigned to it. Now, in your case, then we assign an article to an associate editor. And the associate editor for South America is Emily. And so it's important, I'm saying this probably for the second or third time, but realize Emily is the one that makes most of the decisions on your article. And I'm there to advise her, but pretty much she decides who the article is going to be reviewed by, and then decides whether the article should be accepted, rejected, or sent back for revisions. And as I said, Emily will probably be, for most of your articles, Emily will be the one assigning the articles for peer review. Now, most of the time, we send the article out to 2 individuals for peer review. There's nothing magical about two reviewers, but it tends to be what's typically done. And we may sometimes send it out to a 3rd reviewer. And particularly if, I wouldn't say this is common, but in a very small majority of cases, one author will absolutely love the article, and the other reviewer will absolutely hate the article. And then we'll often send it out to a 3rd reviewer to get a 3rd opinion. And nowadays, and again, you're all on Zoom, you understand this. There's no paper with this process. Everything is done electronically. It's submitted electronically. We would forward the manuscript PDF electronically. The reviewers will review it electronically and send it back. So even though I'm in the United States and you're in South America, your article will get the same speed and attention as an article in the United States would, because with electronic speed, it really doesn't matter where you're at in the world. And by the way, if you look at the journal, we have articles from everywhere. We have articles from Australia. We have articles from Africa. We have articles from South America. Obviously, we have articles from the United States, Canada, Mexico, Central America. We have articles from Europe, Turkey, Eastern Europe. We have articles from Japan. We actually get articles from China, and one of the things we pride ourselves as well is, we don't take sides in political disputes. We often get articles from Iran, which is not on friendly terms with the United States. But I personally feel that neuro-ophthalmology should transcend politics. So I actually like to receive articles from Iran, and if at all possible, I try to accept them. So keep that in mind as well. Of course, the countries that the individuals I hear from are mostly people that there would be no issues with, and we would look forward to accepting articles from your countries. Now, this is sometimes hard to understand. We're not, again, don't think of us as your enemies. Think of us as your friends. We're not trying to reject articles. Trust me. And particularly, as I've already said, I would love to accept more articles from South America. I'm very proud of the fact that Neuro-Ophthalmology is an international journal. So we're on your side, but we also want excellence, and keep that in mind. Now, this gets into something as well. The peer review process is not perfect, and reviewers and editors can be wrong. And just to give you an example, I received this article, and I don't remember where it was from. I think it was someplace in North America. It was either from Canada or United States, that one of the reviewers slammed the article, but really did not like the article. But the other reviewer did, and actually, frankly, I did as well. But I sent the article back, and I said to be revised. And the author wrote me and was really disappointed, and pretty much said one of the reviewers was what I would say off base in the review. And I simply said to him, I said, your article was not rejected, and I understand that all reviewers are not perfect. And he thanked me for it, and he said, "Have a good weekend." This came to me like 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Now, I told you we really try to get a decision back to you in 30 to 45 days. So what can slow down the peer review process? And typically, that's a reviewer who says, yeah, I'll review it, and then forgets about it or gets busy or what have you, and doesn't get around to reviewing it. And in a similar fashion, I'll remind you of a story that I got this sort of a nasty email from an author saying, why has I got my article bad? Why hasn't there been a decision on the article? And I wrote it back and said, not only am I an editor, but I submit articles to journals as well, and I really like to get something back soon as well. And it's not the editor's fault, it's often the peer reviewer's fault. And I said, I'll try to nag them into moving forward with it. And then he wrote me a nice email and said, thank you. I think we finally got the thing straightened out. Now, this is the hardest part sometimes for new authors. And once I'd like to bring this up right off the bat. So you submit the article to us. I would say there's probably less than 5% chance that we will accept the first draft you send us. At best, what's going to happen is we're going to ask you to revise that manuscript. And so I would say 90 to 95% of the articles we ultimately accept undergo at least one revision, and many undergo a second revision, and some even actually undergo a third revision. Don't be disappointed that occurs. As I said, for the people who are submitting their first article, don't consider that your article will likely be accepted in the first try. You're going to have to probably revise the manuscript. And what happens is the revision letter comes from me, an email will come from me, and I will say something to the effect that your article has been reviewed. We think it shows merit, but we think the manuscript requires more work, and I include the opinions of both the reviewers, and most of the times I would include the opinions of Emily, the associate editor, as well. And Emily, do you have any comments on that you'd like to bring up?
No, I don't. Sorry.
All right. No. Does anyone have any questions about that?
You have a question here. You say we have a question here. For a person who is starting, what kind of article would you suggest? For example, case report, review, etc. Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. I will tell you personally, the first thing I ever did, and I think this is true of most, is doing a case report. And I actually think that's a good way to begin. Particularly for residents and fellows in training, it's really hard to put together a good scientific study or a good review article. I would probably recommend that you begin with a case report. And as I said, we we'd like to increase the number of articles from South America, and we would very likely, if it's a good case report, accept it from South America. Any other questions?
No, I am looking for, let me check in the Facebook because we have some people. And pueden hacerla incluso en español y las colocamos en inglés, no hay problema. Si alguien tiene preguntas.
Well, let me just go on. So you get this letter back, and you know, sometimes the reviewers request that you do things that you just can't possibly do. Okay. What you want to do is answer the reviewer's comments as best you can, but you know, sometimes you can't answer the questions. For example, it would not be uncommon if you're doing a case report and the reviewers might ask you for an OCT exam. Well, you may or may not have an OCT exam, right? So to me, most of the times, do what you can. I guess what I'm saying is do what you can do, is do as much as you can do, but you don't necessarily have to do everything they ask. And as I said, sometimes you can't do everything they ask.
Okay. Perfect.
Now, for the instructions for resubmission, you know, as I say, try to respond to the reviewer's comments. Try to respond to Emily's comments as best you can. And if you can't do certain things, we understand that. I mean, nobody's perfect, and your article doesn't have to be perfect to be accepted. Try to be as careful and accurate with the responses as you can, and be clear, do what is required. What we like you to do in the manuscript itself is show the revisions with in the manuscript, and show where you've done your revisions. And obviously, it's best to create a response document when you resubmit it. Go point by point on what you did to make the manuscript better. Any questions there? This, I have to say, this is the area that I think the initial authors who are writing the manuscript for the first time, or young authors, have the most problems with, is revision.
Okay.
And they need to keep in mind that. And again, we don't expect you to be perfect with the revision.
Okay.
So we have two questions here in the group chat. One question from Álvaro Ortiz. He's asking, once the revision process is finished, you get an email or you get a communication with some suggestions to do. But once you do the suggestions and you resubmit your article, the article may be or may get rejected. So if you have any suggestions on how to get your article published and not get it rejected,
yeah.
Once, yeah.
I would tell you this, it depends upon the journal. If I send you a letter saying that your article has merit and we would like you to make changes, I would say 95% of the time we will end up accepting your article. Okay. Now I can tell you what can really tick us off, if that is an American phrase, or get us angry. If Emily has tells you to do 5 or 10 things, and you just change one word and resubmit it, we're not going to like that, right? We expect you to respond to what we ask you to do. And I would say if you do that, it's very unlikely that we will reject the article later on.
Okay.
But answer our questions. I mean, and one of the answers can be, as I said, we don't have that information available. For some reason we couldn't get an OCT, or we didn't do a visual field, or something of that sort. But that's usually not a deal breaker.
And the other question is, how many times do you recommend for an article to be submitted? Like, if I submit the article to a journal and it gets rejected, then I submit the article to other journal and it gets rejected. How many times do you advise on doing that process and like leaving that idea like standing by or like laying on the side?
Okay, I would answer you this way, and that's what I tried to begin with as well. Most materials, most manuscripts can be accepted somewhere. And usually if that has happened to you 2 or 3 times, you are probably shooting to get your article accepted to a journal that is really of a higher quality than the manuscript is. So pick your journals appropriately, and if you do that, and there are so many journals nowadays that you should be able to get it accepted somewhere, but it may not be in a top tier journal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
We have one more question here in the group chat. Like, they're asking, if you want to use some material, how do you, that was published already or like was like on a PowerPoint or is on the internet, how to get the copyrights of that image of that material in order to use it as it is in your publication?
Yeah, that does come up, and then you would require a copyright release from that individual, and you would probably have to tell us you have it. In some times, our manuscript editors will ask for a copy of it.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I didn't bring this up with you, but when you submit an article to Neuro-Ophthalmology, you have to give us the copyright. You cannot maintain the copyright. So what happens is the paper is accepted. The journal is published by Taylor and Francis. There is a manuscript editor there, and it's copy edited. But before the paper can be published, you have to sign over the copyright. So if they see something in the manuscript that's from somewhere else, they are going to require you to have the copyright release for that, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would probably, honestly, I would strongly, unless it's absolutely positively necessary to have something that's already been published put into your article, I would strongly recommend that you don't do it, because it tends to be such a arduous task to get this through the copyright releases and whatnot that it's just probably not worth your time.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
No, I don't see it, but yes.
Here, there's another question here. Like, when you're doing a case report, there are like various, many specialties like that intervene on that case report. Like there are more than four authors. Is there any obstacle in order to get that case report published in case of your journal?
Yeah, and then the answer is no, but we, and I hear what you're saying, but make sure, I would only say in reply that in general, we have decided that four authors is probably right for at least 90% of the case reports, okay? If you have more than that, I would say make sure, just because the patient was seen by another type of specialty, that doesn't mean they necessarily have to be one of the authors. They really should do something substantial. For example, if the case report involved a neuroradiological procedure that was essential to the case report, then including the neuroradiologist, in my opinion, is reasonable. If the case report includes pathology that is essential to the article, then including a pathologist or ocular pathologist on the article is reasonable as well. But just don't include somebody because they saw them or they had minor involvement in the case. Does that make sense?
Yeah. We don't have any more questions at the moment, so if you want.
Okay. So we're at the point where you're going to send it back in, and Emily will look at your documents, and she at this stage, she doesn't have to send it back to the peer reviewers. She can make a decision on it herself. If she looks at your documents and she says, yeah, they did pretty much everything we asked of them, she can just say, accept the article, okay? Or she can send it back to for more comments by the reviewers. So it's sort of a fluid process, and it depends on how much work the article needs, is whether or not you send it back for further review or not. Okay, so when your paper is published, what we do is we publish it online first, and you can go to the neuro-ophthalmology website and you will see they're published online. And just to give you an idea, we have about the 4-issue backlog. So if we accepted an article tomorrow, it probably will not, it will be published online relatively rapidly, maybe in a month or two, but it probably won't be in the print edition until either the last issue of November, December issue of this year or the January, February issue of 2021. But once it's published online, it has, it can be referenced, it can be quoted, it has a DOI number, and so it's essentially been published. So again, it's fully paginated. You can download a PDF of it and the like. So this is the point you can brag to your friends and family and colleagues and show them the article. And then it will be published in print. And again, this is another chance for you to brag to your friends and colleagues when that occurs. So thank you for your attention. Are there any other final questions for either myself or Emily?
Yeah. When writing the article, do you recommend a certain like reference database or like a reference program in order to like make the citations the right way?
Yeah, actually, if you go to the website, and I'm blocking on the name now, is it RefWorks? It could be RefWorks that you can use. Again, if you go to the instructions for authors, there's a way of doing it. I'm pretty sure that we use RefWorks, but again, you can see that by if you go to the instructions to the authors for that.
Okay. Asdrúbal Moreno, quisiera hacer una pregunta
Sí, que la haga.
sí.
Asdrúbal, please. Somebody's going to do a question, doctor.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, Dr. J. Thank you so much for your presentation. I have a question regarding. Yeah, thank you. Regarding in today's world, do you have any tips to get the most out of citations to our published articles? Use social networks and how to get more people to make citations from our art.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. We actually like that as well for our journal, that the articles are, it's not only the authors are interested in articles being cited, we're very much interested in that. And the journal is getting into social media to try to enhance that. I would say this, and you know, there's two different aspects of this. If you're just starting out, case reports are the least cited of any type of article, okay? Review articles are actually the most cited. So particularly if you're trying to get cited a lot, review articles tend to be cited a lot more than anything else. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's a good tip. But do you have any other tip regarding how to expose our article so that other people can read it and then cite the article more afterwards? In other words, because some
go ahead.
Lost. Yeah.
Well, I would say, you know, there's so many different databases. We're on PubMed Central. I honestly think Google is do any of you use Google Scholar? I actually find it quite useful. I mean, I know people, the gold standard is PubMed, but I think Google Scholar is quite good as well. You know, in regards to citability, it really depends on what you're writing. Again, case reports tend to be very unique in a small area, so they're less likely to be cited frequently, whereas review articles tend to be cited quite frequently.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Well, Doctor, you have many thank yous here in the chat, and also excellent, great talk and everything. Thank you so much for help us. And I think, Dr. J, thank you for your time and for sharing your knowledge.
It was my pleasure, and it was my pleasure to, Emily, for you to do this Zoom conference. I found this fascinating.
Yes, and you have many thank you, many congratulations in the chat for you.
I'll be glad to do it again.
Okay.
On a different topic.
Okay, I will talk with you. I will contact you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye. You have to
stop share.
Stop share, yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Gracias a todos. Los veo mañana para la presentación que tenemos. Muchísimas gracias, gracias al doctor.